thank you all for coming, and thank you for staying. You must be starving, so I'll try and make sure that this is worth your while. We've just had a really great talk by Lindsay and Jill about the principles of doing interactive activities online in an asynchronous way. So hopefully what I'm going to be doing will look a little bit more at the synchronous fashion, but within the same set of principles, really. So I've decided to go for a really long title because that's just the best thing to do, really. But first, let me explain who I am. My name is Deirdre Cijffers, and I'm Senior Training Manager at Cambridge University Press. So I work with teachers in universities worldwide who are putting their language programs either partially or wholly online. And this particular experiment was actually, what our plenary speaker this morning suggested as walking a mile in our customers' shoes. So we actually took our products, our platform, and we used them to try out what the experience really is. So we do lots of research to find out what customers want and what they do and how they feel about what we've made, but we hadn't ever done this ourselves before. So it was quite an interesting experiment. So to unpack my very long title, what I'm looking at is online-only courses. A lot of definitions of online-only is self-access. It's quite whistling. It's really just like your standard compliance training, health and safety training, the stuff your employer makes you do, you get absolutely no support through it and you just work through materials. It's not very interesting. And it is the weaker version of Lindsay and Jill's interactions. It's really just interacting with a machine, not interacting with other people. So the online-only courses can involve some interaction with material, but also some interaction with people. And it is the communication, the interaction with the other people, not just with the teacher, but with each other, that was what was important for me within this experiment. And then the facilitating bit is the bit that I want to get to at the end, where we look at how we make this happen. So it's not something that's obvious. We say, we've got, everybody's on Facebook and they all talk to each other, but are they talking to each other? Are they interacting, or are they just saying things and not actually having meaningful communication that helps people learn? So how do we make that happen is the big thing. So very briefly, I'll give you a little context to the project because it's quite unusual, why and how we did it, both in terms of kind of objectives and the technology that we used, why we chose that. The obstacles that we had, as you would imagine, it was a technology project, there's going to be obstacles in there. What our experiments were and the lessons learned. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time in the lessons learned bit, so that hopefully there's something that we did right or wrong that will be helpful to you in how you go forward. So the context is an online-only course. I was in Cambridge and my students were in, does anybody know where that other red dot is? Geography test. It's Manila. So we have an office in Manila, which is populated largely by some very technical people who were very, very keen to do some English language work with people in Cambridge. So they requested this course. So the reason for doing this was because the Manila team really, really wanted to do some English. They had asked again and again, and it's just not really something that is within our usual kind of project plans and time and things, and it's quite time consuming, as you know. Teaching is not something that you can do in 5 minutes. So it came to myself and Eric Baber, who took on the kind of task of trying this out with them. So it was definitely from them. It's a very specific set of motivations as well. And we did an initial needs analysis and interviews. We very diligently did our standard, what do you need to do in your work, how much English do you use in outside your work, what kinds of tasks do you do that you need English for, all of that kind of stuff, which was, pretty standard. And then we had interviews. We had one-to-one interviews with each of the participants to find out what their goals were, what they were like, what they were into, and to get to know them a bit better as people. This was insufficient, as we will discover later. There is more that needs to be done prior to starting the course if you're online only. So what came out was that they had professional goals. They need to talk to team leaders and other team members who are based in the UK and the US. They spent a lot of time on Skype for Business, in online meetings, speaking English, writing reports, chairing these meetings. So there's a lot of very functional stuff that they wanted to be better at. They also wanted to be able to have chat. They just wanted to, get along with their colleagues and develop relationships. So it was a much more social goal to that. They also, a huge bit was about confidence. One of the things that came out really strongly was pronunciation. We want to work on pronunciation. As you'll see in a minute, the lowest level was a really high B1. These people were hired because their English is good, and their pronunciation is, frankly, really good. So I reread that as confidence. So pronunciation was not interfering with comprehension at all. It was really just a question of confidence and not wanting to push themselves forward. So it was quite surprising to see all of those things. What came out during the course is that a lot of students had loads of interests that just hadn't come up in the interview. And what I would recommend is that if you're doing that in your survey, if you include what ELT Jam referred to yesterday as powerful questions, so stuff that goes beyond what we would use to compile a course in the beginning, and think really about who those people are and what rounds them out, then you'll get a much better sense of who they are before they start, which means you can tailor from the very beginning. So I thought I was tailoring, but it needed way more effective information, even quantitatively, so through a survey, before we started on the interviews even, because that would have given us a lot more stuff to discuss even then. Anyway, so how did we do this? So we've got these students, they're super motivated, they really want to do this. They've got loads of different reasons for doing the course, and their teacher is really pretty far away. So we ran effectively 3 courses. So I did one and Eric Baber did one from September to December, and then I am now in the middle of running a second one to complete their round of 3. So 3 courses that each last 12 weeks. Each week there's 1 hour of self-access study and there's 1 hour of a live session, and it's the live session that I want to talk about today. So the materials that we used, obviously, were Cambridge. We're going to use Cambridge stuff. So we used, the one that I'm teaching now is the lowest level. So it's the second half of Touchstone 4, which is kind of B1, high B1. The course that I ran in September was the C1 class. I saw there was a nice high-level class. I love teaching high level, so I nabbed that quickly. You noticed the numbers were problematic. So we started with 6 people, and 2 people got moved on to a different project, and their timetables changed, so they could no longer attend any of the live sessions. 4 people in a group is a problem, and I'll come to that later. And Eric's class was the B2 level, so he had 9 in his class who dropped to 8 for the exact same reason, but that was a much more substantial and much more manageable number for live sessions. So with all of that, we had really substantial, well-structured material that we were hoping to adapt and personalize, customize to their situation and what they were trying to learn. So on the Cambridge LMS, which is, again, our platform, which is where the online stuff for these titles is held and accessed, we got them to do 1 hour of work in the LMS on the coursework that is part of the title, and then we got them to do communicative activities in a live session using different tools, which are not ours at all. We have had a contract with WebEx, which is why it was our main choice. Skype was used in a slightly hacked solution that meant that we could have breakout rooms with WebEx. And Zoom has breakout rooms, which are fantastic, and you really need these. And then we tried to use Blackboard Collaborate, but we could not get it to work even once. So it's a bit of an afterthought there. So there's materials, there are tools for asynchronous work, there are tools for synchronous work. In the LMS, we asked students to work through the published content. So they were working through language activities and kind of preparation type stuff. We didn't really ask them to do loads of communicative things, partly because they all sit in the same office. And the class that I have right now are on the exact same team, so they actually sit opposite one another. I didn't really feel that that was a logical way to get them to communicate. So I put all the communication into the live session and focused on the language just on its own outside. So it was a proper flipped classroom model. So language first, communication together. So when we have that opportunity to be together, that's the time that we try to take advantage of the presence of these other people. All of this was wonderful, except for several occasions when we had some obstacles down to the technology. Obviously, I had a lesson 2 weeks ago when literally nobody's mic worked. So obviously that made things difficult. So my backup plan was to do chat. So we had chat conversations, which if you're trying to develop speaking is not fantastic, but it's also not the end of the world. So if you're chatting, you're at least working on conversational turns and obviously not the high pressure of having to speak on the spot, but you are having to think of something on the spot and make a contribution. So it was very stilted, and it wasn't fantastic. So making sure that everybody has set up their stuff before they even come to class and know where they're sitting, what access they have, all of the rest of that is really important. And to test that every week, not just at the beginning. Timing was an enormous problem. Obviously Manila is quite far away, so they were at 8 hours distance from me, which meant that every Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock I was teaching, which with the first group, who were very high level and super confident, that was fine. I taught in my pajamas and nobody knew, although they know now clearly. But with the second group, they were way less confident and we were not making a connection. So I decided, right, we're going to turn the cameras on and see each other, make eye contact. In the session this morning about task-based learning, before the speaker got us to speak to each other, she got us to look at each other and make eye contact. You can't do that online if your camera's not on, and it does make a difference. It makes a massive difference to how they perceive you as a person, to how you perceive them. There was one woman who, her mic was always on low volume. There was no way to raise it. And in the beginning, I made a snap judgment that her English actually wasn't very good. But it wasn't, it was just because I couldn't hear her. When I could hear her, when I was listening properly, actually she's one of the strongest in the class. So, it's an interesting kind of being blindsided by small influences that you don't think are important but actually are. So the timing thing was an issue. For me, 6 a.m. is horrendous, and having to be presentable at 6 a.m. means getting up at 5:30. So it was difficult. And if I had forgotten to plan my lesson, it meant getting up at 4:30. So for them though, it was at 2 p.m. So it's smack in the middle of their working day. And if they're coming up to deadline, this gets shelved completely. And if they're on different teams, some of them shelve it and some of them will still come to class. So for me, having only 4 in the group, even if one person was missing, all my pair work stuff was completely out the window. So that was one of the things that was really very difficult about it. The other thing is the teacher centricity. So when you're online, it is very easy for the leader, the person who has set up the session, to be the center of the session. And this isn't what we want. We're trying to move away from, chalk and talk, presentation, and then, get them to do a little bit of practice. But actually, that is what the technology pushes you into as well. So there's a cultural side of that as well, which is the teacher knows best, and I'm going to listen to the teacher, and I'm going to do what I'm told. And that's fine, and we deal with that everywhere. A lot of cultures will do that. So when you walk into a classroom as the teacher, you kind of are the center, and it is an active job to push it away. Then you add the technological stuff, and you need to set things up to make that work. So that was a little bit of a problem. So making these connections between each of the individuals on a one-to-one kind of thing, and let alone having one person being more central, those things were quite difficult to achieve. And asking someone, oh, so tell me about your weekend, or tell me about this concept, what's your opinion? They're still coming to you. They're not talking together. It's not a round table. It's still quite kind of bicycle wheel spokes. So it takes an active push to change that. Oh. The other thing that didn't make it onto this version of the slides, clearly, is the notion of the whole group phenomenon, which I've mentioned before in other talks. But if I am in a group, if I'm a student in a class of 10 and I'm asked to speak to the class, I have to speak to 10 people. If I'm a bit shy, that's terrifying. I don't necessarily want to do it, it's not great. However, if I'm a student in a group of 30 and my teacher splits us into 3 groups of 10 and I'm asked to speak to my group, that's far less terrifying, because not everybody looking at you, there's other stuff going on in the room, and it's quite enabling to be able to speak to the same number of people effectively, but the idea is that you're not speaking to the whole group, you're just speaking to a subset. So this is where the technology comes in and kind of building out the pair work and things like that. So the first thing that we decided, both Eric and I discovered, that breakout rooms are really essential. If the piece of technology that you're using does not allow for breakout rooms, then you need to do something else. So what we ended up doing was we had our main conversation occurred in WebEx, and then because these people are all quite technical, we totally trusted them to go away and set up their own Skype for Business conversations and include us so that we could dip in. So it's effectively the same thing as having breakout groups. Zoom is infinitely better at doing that, and if you can pay for that, brilliant. It's much easier to manage. But with groups, you essentially get the pair work going or small group work going, which takes away the whole audience problem, and it gives people, it democratizes participation. So it takes away from like one person speaking all the time. Because even if you have got students speaking, only one person can speak at a time, because you can't hear each other. If two people are talking, you're not sure who said what, and it gets very confusing, which is quite unnatural. Break it into smaller groups and break them out. This isn't rocket science. We've been doing this face-to-face for ages. Yeah, we want people to talk more. You put them into groups, you switch the groups, you change the stage of the task. All of that is really important. So, and pairs worked much better than groups of 3 or 4, because again, in groups of 3 or 4, one person tended to dominate. So put it into twos. Really very simple. You always need to have a backup tool. So when we were experimenting with Blackboard and it never worked, I had WebEx ready to go in the background. And similarly, if Zoom isn't working for you or isn't a possibility, you need to have something else that allows you to do your thing. And then the other thing is having a backup plan. We know to do that with technology anyway. If it doesn't work, what are you going to do instead? So if you're going to deconstruct your staged activity, what are you going to do that's still going to be meaningful, valuable, and relevant to the language that they've studied online? So quite an easy structure that we came up with. The lessons were 1 hour long, so you don't have a lot of time. There's faff at the beginning, making sure everybody can hear and speak, etc. And then feedback on the language that they've worked on, feedback on anything that they've done communicatively, and then you're into your main piece of work that is related and relies heavily on the language that they've done. So you split them into your 2 pairs with using the breakout rooms or your hacked solution on Skype. They talk, they do their questions, and then they come back in to the whole group to discuss something else. But it's not enough to just go, okay, you talk about your opinions, and then come back and tell us about your opinions, which is nice. We all have opinions. We like things, we don't like things, but really it doesn't go anywhere. There's no purpose to it. So they need to be staged. There needs to be a purpose for the first stage and a purpose for the second stage, and they need to be very obviously interdependent. One relates to the other, and the other one depends on the first one being completed. The outcome needs to be very clear. So there was one example during the course. A terrible thing happened in America, and less than half the electorate chose the wrong person to lead quite a large country. So we ended up with lessons on basically Trump. So I was doing persuasive language at the time, and in Eric's course he happened to be doing analysing charts and graphs and things. So we managed to reformulate those into like charts about what the American people wanted, what was important to them, all of that kind of stuff, and relate it to the Trump win. And then with the persuasive stuff, we ended up creating a manifesto and then doing a debate and somebody winning. So at each stage there was something for them to do. They had to analyze, or they had to prepare and then come in together, do something and win or prove a point or whatever. So there was always an outcome for that. So the examples that we have, these are just some of the very simple things that we did. So one thing that we did recently was prepare a party on a certain budget. So there was lots of, the language point we were looking at was have something done, get something done, as opposed to doing something yourself. My students, I know for a fact, do a lot of partying. When it's Halloween, they dress up their entire office, including their desks, and they have everybody's family and kids come in and they judge how cool the desks are. So there's a big competition. So they love doing that kind of stuff. So preparing a party on a budget, they did that in pairs, and then coming back together, they presented their idea, and then I go, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have £500 each, we've only got 750 total. What are you going to take out? And because you've had people in pairs first, they're invested in their idea, they want it to be the thing that is chosen, but they do need to negotiate the new version. So they're reviewing the persuasive language we looked at before, also looking at have it done, get it done, no, we're going to do it ourselves. So it just builds in those things. The other thing to note is that this is a flipped model, but they've done the language of have it done, get it done, but if they come to class and they haven't done the language, this can't fall on its face, because you can still do the task without having the language perfect. So if they haven't done the language, they're going to buy a cake or pay for decorations. They're not going to have it arranged or have it made, but you can tell from their participation in the activity whether or not they've done the online activities and whether or not they learned from them. So it's kind of self-contained in that you can do it with or without the preparation, which is very important for success of your lesson, but you can also really get people to be quite creative if they have done the language. And interestingly, this group in their pre-course survey said no role plays, absolutely no role plays, but we hate them. And then, you know, doing a party or like writing a manifesto and trying to be elected, they were totally up for it. So I'm not sure what kind of role plays they were expecting, but it clearly wasn't what was previously advertised. So the clear outcome of that one was get the best party that you can afford, and it had to be an agreed solution, etc. Another one that we did, again, this is the Trump thing, so they're preparing arguments for and against. This is not dissimilar to the asynchronous activities that were talked about in the session before. And then they present their ideas, they debate, and the outcome is to win the debate or to get elected. So in their case, well, in my class, it was definitely getting elected. And they really got into it. They went all, you know, unconventional about things, and it was really, really fun. The other thing that was very surprising was that they really enjoyed listening to the song I've Got a Dream from the Disney movie Tangled. I was not expecting that, but it happened to be a lesson about dreams. They did that. So again, their statements in the beginning were very, we don't want this, we're techie people, we don't like this creative role play type stuff, but actually in certain ways they really responded to it very well. And the last one, this is like slightly more complicated with lines, but it's really, again, it's something you'll recognize from face-to-face teaching. So you've got your pairs in your two rooms, then you're going to switch the pairs so that each person is talking to a new person, and then you come back to the whole group for feedback. So they're really simple, very standard face-to-face lesson types, but that we want to replicate that within the online space. Because again, there's always that assumption like, oh, we're online, we'll communicate. We can. Technology allows us to communicate, but that's all it does. It just allows us to do it. So it's still down to the teacher to make meaningful, useful, effective, helpful communication occur. So this pattern, we prepared sides of a dialogue. This one was from Eric's class. Then they came back and did a role play, and they were fine about that. And then they reported back. Very, very simple. And the outcome was to win a negotiation or find a solution. The particular thing was about boomerang kids. I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept. It's children who grow up to the age of 18, go away to university, and then come back and live with their parents afterwards. And this is not so great for the parents, because they thought they'd dispatch them off into the world. So the negotiation was, how are you going to approach your child to get them to move out? And from the other side was, how are you going to approach your parents to let them live with you for free for another year? And then they did the role play of the parent, child, young adult, and then ideally we decided who was going to get allowed to stay home, etc. So very simple, very kind of obvious, but really none of these can be derailed by not having done the language beforehand, which is super important, but they can be done, and the language is then there. Because this all relates really closely to the language that they have done, the next stage is feedback, and the feedback is preferably on the language that they're supposed to have studied. So you can prep that feedback stage even before they come in. So you give them a few pointers on actual utterances that they made, plus this is this kind of summary information that relates to what we did before. So it's not entirely, it's responsive, but it's not entirely unpredictable. So there's a predictable structure to the lesson, but not too much of a kind of predictable pattern, if you like. And that's basically it. It was quite an interesting experiment to do. It was very different. It was not the same as, I'm sure, the online courses that you are running with people who are spread out further away, in which case the asynchronous communication becomes much more important. It was really very much, they did the course because I was far away, not because other people were far away. Are there any questions? Fabulous. Oh.
Yeah, can I just clarify what you mean about the breakout areas? Is this just another online area, sorry, that we can't access?
We should be able to access it, yeah. So if you're using a tool like Zoom, for instance, you have a meeting room and then you click a button and you can put people into smaller rooms. So and then they pop out of the main room into that one, but you can still see it.
Oh, you
can
see it?
Yeah, yeah. So you can't see it all the time. You can't hear everything going on all the time, but you leave the main room and go into and come back and go into each one. Yeah. Yeah, so they'll get on with stuff. It's exactly the same as monitoring. So they'll go into that breakout room and have the conversation that you've told them to have. You go in, check that they're still on task, give them a few pointers, whatever, and then go and check on another pair. So you effectively...
Oh, so you can give them some privacy?
Yes, yeah. Right. So privacy is great within reason, so that's kind of where it goes, yeah.
Yeah. Have you used Adobe Connect?
Yes.
We're
no.
trying this at the moment.
Yeah, it will be very similar lines. It's just different labels on the buttons. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, make sure they're breakout rooms. In our
that's a great idea.
Yeah, in WebEx they do actually have breakout rooms, but our license didn't include it, so we didn't have that. So just make sure they're definitely there, because it is essential to this type of thing succeeding.
That's a nice idea.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thank you very much.